I would say that it is, and it's interesting if we sort of zoom out our perspective a little bit, looking at sort of diet culture like over a period of years or even decades. What the carnivore diet nowadays is, I would say, is sort of the latest iteration of the overall trope, which is a low-carb diet. And it's the most extreme possible variation of that, at least that anyone's come up with so far. And second to that would be like a ketogenic diet, paleo diet, and various other ones which are varying degrees less extreme. But yeah, the carnivore diet that's basically what it is. It's a very basically no carb diet because animal products actually don't contain carbohydrates, and you can survive on that. Carbohydrates are not an essential nutrient, protein and fat are, and so if you were not to eat protein or fat, you would eventually run into deficiency and health issues from that, particularly like stuff like that online with social media. It's so easy for someone to sit behind a keyboard and just type out whatever kind of vitriol or kind of trolling type comment that they want to. But in those situations, the way I look at it is think about kind of where the other person is at, where they're coming from. I think if you're on the internet writing negative comments about anyone, you're probably not in a great place in your own life. And so I deploy compassion towards people like that. I'm like, yeah, word up, like I wish you the best, but I'm just gonna keep doing my own thing. And it's kind of like, I don't care about what the haters think. I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing, focusing on the positive. And there are lots of people that are receptive to that and that are inspired by that. And those are the people that I want to talk to. I'm not interested in like butting heads with somebody or getting into a comment war on social media because I don't have time for that. But also it's like, those probably aren't the people that you're going to win over anyway, right? But there's lots of people out there who are receptive. Oh, I tried going vegan, I didn't have enough energy and I was losing weight and I felt weak and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you probably just weren't eating enough, particularly if you're losing weight and you didn't want to, then for sure you weren't eating enough because that's how that works. And so that's something I really wanted to emphasize to folks, like eating a whole food plant-based diet for sure is the healthiest way to eat. I highly recommend it, but make sure you are getting some calorie-dense foods in, eating plenty of whole grains, nuts and seeds, dried fruit, stuff like that. Smoothies are totally good, great way to get calories in. And you want to make sure that you are replacing the calories and the nutrients from the foods that you're cutting out with whole plant sources, which are going to be healthier. You're going to get a better bang for your buck nutrition-wise, but you want to make sure that you're getting enough calories in order to just kind of fuel your body, give it the energy that it needs, and make sure that you continue to feel good and have energy to thrive on a plant-based diet. So that was one final point that I wanted to add there as well.
Hey everyone, it's Opie here. Just a quick note, I caught up with a young gentleman by the name of Forest Nash, vegan fitness coach, originally from the US, now calls Melbourne home for most of the time. So I was able to catch up with him one-on-one. And I wanted to address this before I get into the video because we go through some of the basic questions that you and I might have, such as the protein issue. Are we going to be lacking protein? Vitamin B12. Hey, what happens if we like cheese so much? What happens if I lose my manliness because I get called a soy boy? Whatever your concerns are, I make sure that I ask these questions from Forrest and he articulates it beautifully. But before I go into that, I do want to just say that the reason why I'm having these chats is because I believe, and obviously Forrest believes, that this particular diet and lifestyle is not only the best for you, but best for the planet and best for animal well-being as well. So if I can take you back, right, several decades to 1964. In 1964, the US Surgeon General ended up putting an announcement out saying that, hey, there is a direct causation between smoking and lung cancer. And ever since then, people started smoking less and lung cancer rates reduced. But here's the kicker. Prior to that point, there were supposedly 6,000 observational studies making a correlation between smoking and lung cancer. 6,000 odd. You would think after 5,000, people would be like, hey, maybe there's something to this. 6,000 came. But until that causation study was announced and pushed out by the Surgeon General, nothing really changed. In regards to our diet, I feel like we're in that tipping point as well. There's so much data out there. In fact, Dr. Michael Greger ended up writing this wonderful book, probably sold millions of copies now, on how not to die. And he goes through the 15 most common ways that we humans die, such as cancers, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, and a whole bunch of other things, 15 in total, on the number of ways that we die. And he comes down to the one conclusion of it's based on lifestyle and dietary choices and predominantly, adopting a plant-based diet. I hope this makes sense to you. I really hope you do end up watching the full video that I shot with Forest. A lovely guy. Reach out to him if you want some personal one-on-one coaching or feedback on where you are with your life. Other than that, thank you very much. Enjoy. I'll see you in the next video.
Welcome to the Victory Lion Podcast. Lion!
Today is about the power of you. You will change the world.
And now your host,
OP Jayasinghe.
Mr. Forest Nash, thank you
sir.
very much for coming.
Pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I've been following you for some time now, number of years, and I never dreamt in my wildest dreams that I'll actually meet you in person. So it is actually truly an honor, to be honest. Not because of anything, you're actually a really nice and humble guy. And I could tell by, just the emails and the way you have spoken online and so forth. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad we got a chance to connect, and thank you so much for the invitation to be on your podcast. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. When I told my kids, hey, I'm meeting this guy, his name's Forest Nash, this is what he looks like, the first question was, is his real name Forest? And I go, I think it is. What's the story behind it? Is there a story or not really?
Yeah, that's just my name. Like, I guess my parents are kind of, they're sort of, I would say, retired hippies now. So I thought that was a cool name. Like, it's in the US, there's a name which is Forest, it has 2 R's.
Yes.
And my name is just Forest with 1 R. So it's like kind of like the rainforest or the woods or that sort of thing. But yeah, I've learned since being in Australia that's not a very common name here. And so sometimes people will reach out to me and they'll be like, hey, Nash, blah, 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 blah. But then I write back and I have to sort of sign it Forest. And so that is indeed my name.
I love it. I love it. I am intrigued about your upbringing, which I know the upbringing, but for those who haven't heard your story, could you give us, how your parents raised you and your brother, what that was like in the environment, being homeschooled, stuff like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I definitely did have kind of an unconventional upbringing, I would say, in multiple ways. So being homeschooled was part of that. So my brother and I were both homeschooled basically all the way up like through the high school years until we both went to college. And so that was different to the norm, obviously, but it was really cool, actually. The way that my parents chose to do it is sort of, I think it was what's called child-directed learning. And so we actually had a lot of say in kind of what we were going to study or what we were going to do. We had more kind of freedom or autonomy in that regard versus, being kind of put through a set curriculum if you were to go to school, that sort of thing. So I do feel fortunate to have that background, although quite different to the norm. And sometimes, people would be wondering like, oh, are your kids going to have the right social skills and things of that nature, not going to school or being around their peers as much. But of course, we did have, our peer group of friends that we would hang out with, and we were part of like a homeschooling group of other families in the area that also were doing that with their kids. And so we would go to do various activities and field trips and things like that. So definitely have that social component as well. And I'd like to think I turned out all right. I guess that's anyone's guess. But yeah, that was kind of the upbringing that I had in that respect. And then my brother and I both went on to go to college and then university and did well there. So certainly, I don't think it held us back in any respect in that regard, but it was a cool experience for sure. And on top of that, kind of growing up where we did, my parents live, and they still live there now, in a house that they built in the middle of the woods in Virginia, which is kind of on the east coast of the US. And so, yeah, we literally, like, if you walk out the front door of their house, you can't see anybody else's house. The closest neighbor is like a 5-minute walk away. And so my brother and I were just outside, all the time, running around in the woods and climbing trees and, going swimming in the like pond that was across the road and doing all this crazy stuff. So it was definitely, it was looking back on it. I don't think I realized at the time
How good it was.
But now I'm like, wow, that was a pretty cool childhood that we had. So
Amazing.
I feel very, very thankful to my parents for that.
Yeah, like for anyone, any child, that would be their dream, right? Like, being in the woods and the forest and, in nature, right?
Yeah. And it's funny because after living there, like throughout sort of my teenage years and everything, I was kind of like, oh, I want to get out of here. Like, I want to go live in the city or that sort of thing. Like, it's too, like, basically to get from my parents' house to the nearest town, which was just a small town in Virginia, it was like a half-hour drive in the car. So it was like, if you wanted to go get groceries or go to the gym or do whatever, you had to go that kind of commute.
Yep.
And so after a while, I was like, man, I want to go and like live in a city or something. But now, after having lived in various cities for many years in my adult life, I really, looking back on, I value that, and I have so much appreciation for it. And even just like a couple weeks ago, I was fortunate to be able to visit my parents. I spent a couple of weeks at their house, and it was so nice. It was springtime there in the US, and all the trees were leafing out. The weather was perfect, and going for walks in the woods and going and jumping in that same swimming hole that I went in when I was a kid and all that stuff. So yeah, it's, I definitely, I feel very fortunate to have had that and to still be able to have that when I go and visit my family as well.
That's, incredible. I love that. And for those who don't know Forrest's story, you are unique in the sense that you grew up not eating any meat at all right?
Correct.
Which is, in my eyes, wonderful thing. So could you give us a background on how that came to be? Like, that's obviously not normal, right, in the traditional sense. So what was the story behind that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my brother and I were both raised vegetarian from birth. So neither of us have ever eaten meat, and still to this day, that's true.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was my parents were both vegetarian already before we were born. And that was for ethical reasons. Basically, it was part of the spiritual path that they follow. And that was based on the teachings of a specific meditation teacher. It was actually based out of India. It was sort of part of the Sikh tradition, or sort of a subset of that. And so that was their path that they had been doing for years before my brother and I came along. And so, of course, naturally, that's just the upbringing that we had then in our family. And so it was a lacto-vegetarian diet is what we ate at the time. So it was no meat, no eggs, no fish, or anything of that nature. The only animal products that we had in our diet was actually dairy. So it'd be like butter, cheese, milk, stuff like that.
Okay.
And I think the reason for that, interestingly enough, my parents had that sort of the path that they were following, which was based on this, the sort of Indian meditation teacher and that whole spiritual community that they were part of. And I think the reason that dairy was actually a part of it is because perhaps at the time, like in India, back in the earlier 1900s and so on, cows are considered sacred, is my understanding. And so they would probably, hypothetically at least, they would have had a much better time there than they would be having nowadays with like modern industrial animal agriculture and that sort of thing. And so cows were sort of revered. And so the idea was potentially you could be consuming dairy products without it being sort of harmful to the animals.
That makes perfect sense, actually, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But of course, nowadays with, living in the Western world, of course, that's not the case. And so, my transition or sort of evolution with my diet came about when I was sort of later on in my, I'd say sort of late adolescence or kind of early in my 20s. I was getting a lot more into the health and fitness side of things and really paying attention to what I was eating and nutrition and learning about that. And what I noticed was the dairy products that I was having, which is just, milk or Greek yogurt or whey protein or things like that, they didn't really agree with me very well. And I found that I actually felt better when I didn't have them. Like when I was consuming a lot of dairy products, I might feel bloated or have congestion or like break out with acne or things like that. And I was also the type of person where if I'm going to do something, I like to do it 100%, and that's still true. And so I became interested in really the fully kind of plant-based diet or vegan nutrition. I started researching that, and there was not as much information back, that 10 or 15 years ago online as there is now, but there were still some, and there were people that were doing bodybuilding and fitness and the things that I was really passionate about on a vegan diet. And so that really inspired me. And I was like, what if these people can do it and they're thriving, they're doing well, they're achieving the goals that I want to achieve, then I want to do that too. And so I actually had 2 attempts at going vegan. The second one stuck. The first one, I guess I was probably, would have been maybe late in my teens or around 20 or something like that. And I kind of knew that was the direction I wanted to go, but I didn't quite have the full sort of understanding or knowledge on how to go about it. And so I was kind of still moving away from eating dairy products, but I still had whey protein was like the supplement that I was using because I wanted to gain muscle, and I was big into training at that point. And so I was sort of like almost vegan, but not quite 100%. And then eventually it was kind of like a situation where I wouldn't say it was pressure from my family, but I felt like I was missing out like on eating pizza or certain foods like that with dairy products that I'd grown up with. And so for a while then, maybe for a few years, I ended up going back and like having dairy products again. But then in 2015 was when I fully made the switch, so 10 years ago now. And I kind of researched it a little bit more and figured out, replace the whey protein with plant-based protein and various other things like that. And I will say, I wish I had done it sooner, but
Yeah, everyone says that, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. But to this day, certainly, I would say the best decision I've ever made in my life. I've never looked back since. And as far as my training is concerned, I feel like my performance, my recovery, my energy is better. I just feel better in my body. I feel kind of lighter and leaner and cleaner physically, but also looking at it from kind of a logical or an ethical side of things, it feels more aligned. Yeah, it makes more sense to me to eat that way. And so that's the path that I've been on now for the last 10 years and for the next however many I'm on this planet for sure. And I will say as well, I feel very grateful to my parents for giving me that upbringing, a vegetarian diet and lacto-vegetarian, not even consuming eggs or that sort of thing. And I was already, 90% of the way there to eating a plant-based diet versus someone like yourself, like you shared with me before we started the podcast. You grew up kind of in an omnivorous family, but then made that switch yourself. And as I was saying, I think that's even more difficult often, but more admirable as well, because it's a bigger change and you're kind of going against that sort of culture, upbringing that you had, but acting in accordance with your values. And so I have so much admiration for that. I think that's fantastic. And for me, it was, the switch was a little bit easier because I was closer to that result already. And I will say as well, I'm very grateful to my parents, and I've now been able to sort of pay it forward or pay it back to them a little bit. So they're sort of, I'd say 99.9% vegan now as well. They don't have any dairy products at home. They eat a mostly whole food, plant-based diet, which is also what I eat and advocate. Yep. And every once in a while at a restaurant or something, might have milk or that sort of thing, but they are very, very close. And so I feel, grateful to have been able to kind of give that gift back to them as well, because I feel like they gave me so much when I was growing up.
Yeah, amazing story. And as I said, it's very rare to find an individual like you. That's why I was like, oh my goodness, okay, I gotta talk to Forest in person just to get your views. But as I was telling you before, I grew up as a very strong Buddhist, and the whole Buddhist philosophy is don't harm any animals. And when I spoke to the elders, the monks, as I was growing up and going, hey, we're not told to not hurt any life forms at all, but every time we eat, there's chicken, fish, some sort of meat on our thing. Not even at home, just at the temple as well. It was completely normal. And the rationale that that I got, even today, this is the excuse that I hear, is that as long as you're not killing the animal or it's not being killed for you, it's okay to consume. And I find this obviously completely hypocritical. I don't agree with it. So obviously that's why I made the change. Very similar to your story, I ended up going vegetarian just overnight, maybe around 2016 or so, vegetarian. No issues. I'm going, okay, gotta go vegetarian. But to be honest, that I went for health reasons. I was suffering from heavy migraines. So I thought I'm going to clean out my diet, no processed foods, no meat, done. And then about 6 months into that journey, I'm going, maybe I should go plant-based, vegan. So, but obviously the natural inklings of, am I going to be deficient in this, that, and the other? So went down the path of Dr. Michael Greger, Dr. Neil Barnard, and just read a whole bunch of stuff.
Yep.
And even at that, I felt like intellectually, I was going to be fine. The only thing I needed to supplement was vitamin B12, and everything else was going to be fine, but I couldn't do it. Then I came across a video where this mother cow had given birth. The baby calf got dragged away by the farmer, and the poor mother cow was just going after him.
Yep.
And at this point in time, my son, who was also breastfeeding, I made that connection straight away, and boom, all that knowledge just went out the window, and overnight I became plant-based. Well, plant-based at the time, and then vegan over time, if that makes sense to you, and I'm sure it does. But yeah, that was my journey. It was very similar in the transition timeframes anyway. But yeah, definitely admire you for not only keeping yourself fit, like I'm looking at you now, posture's amazing, and I'll put some pictures of Forest, in the bodybuilding scene. So in terms of your professional life, what are you doing now? Like in terms of, are you competing at the moment? Are you training others?
Absolutely, and that's a great question. Just to double back on that last thing that you said, the one thing I wanted to add when you were sharing about your own journey and kind of transitioning to a vegetarian and plant-based diet, and how it was initially, it was kind of more for health reasons. And I would say for myself, it was actually the same way. Like I mentioned, when I was consuming dairy products, I noticed like I just didn't feel as good. I felt better without them. And so that was definitely a big motivator, because I was very passionate about health and fitness already at that time. And I did feel much better than when I wasn't consuming dairy and just on a fully plant-based diet. So that was sort of the initial spark that kind of pushed me over the edge. But of course, then since making that change, I've learned so much more about the environmental benefits, of course, the ethical benefits of a vegan lifestyle. And so my conviction has grown much stronger for those reasons as well.
Yep.
And now I proudly say I am vegan for the animals and for the environment and for my health.
Yep.
It's kind of a, the
Trifecta.
trifecta there. Exactly. And so, yeah, I feel a lot of conviction around that. But that, for me, initially, it was that health motivation, and then the other pieces all kind of fell into place around that. So it sounds like similar to yourself in that respect.
Yeah, amazing. I'll come back to what you're doing now. If I can get your help in sort of dismissing some of the common myths, and I know you've said this a number of times, but let's just address the main one that we both hear often, the protein myth. Can you just tell the listeners about the whole protein myth? Why is this such a big concern? Why, if you tell someone to stop eating meat or dairy or whatever, where am I going to get my protein?
Yep.
Yeah, can you address that a little bit from your experience?
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly one of the most common questions that we get asked as vegans in general, and certainly for someone like myself who's kind of in the fitness and bodybuilding scene as well. That comes up very frequently. Like even yesterday, I was just at the gym working out. I was wearing a vegan jumper like the one I'm wearing now. And somebody started asking me about it. And, what do you eat for protein? And we had a whole conversation. And it was actually great because she was very interested in it. She was pescatarian herself already. And so I just was sharing about my diet. I eat beans and lentils and tofu and things like that to get protein. And so I was able to, I think, kind of give her some good information and maybe kind of nudge her in that direction a little bit. And she was very receptive to it. So it does come up regularly. But it's something where I feel like it's a great opportunity actually when those questions get asked to really meet people where they are, be friendly and approachable, not try to beat anybody over the head with it or tell them that they're doing anything wrong, but just try to set a good example, focus on the positives and talk about the health benefits and whatever it may be that people are interested in. And I find people respond very well to that. So when it comes to protein, of course, as you and I both know, there is no shortage of protein on a plant-based diet. We can absolutely get all of the protein that we need from plants. And another point which I think is interesting and worth pointing out that a lot of people maybe don't know or certainly don't think about is all protein originally comes from plants, right? So plants absolutely photosynthesis and everything, and they create protein in the first place, which then certain herbivorous animals eat, like maybe a cow, for example, and then some folks might eat that and they get their protein that way. Yep. But it's sort of secondhand protein, as I like to call it. And so, yeah, you can absolutely just cut out the middle cow, so to speak, and get your protein directly from the source. 100%. And all of the essential amino acids can be found in plant foods. And not only that, all whole plant foods actually contain all of the essential amino acids in differing amounts. And so if you're eating a variety of plant-based foods and plant-based proteins, you're going to have a complete amino acid profile. It's not something that we have to worry about. That was an idea I think was popularized actually back in the 1980s, was this idea of kind of protein combining, where you have to have like beans and grains together or things like that in order to get all your amino acids. The good news is, though, we know now the body actually has a pool of amino acids available, and it's very good at kind of breaking things down and putting them back together in the ways that it needs to form whatever proteins that it needs. And so we don't have to worry about that protein combining as long as we're getting enough total protein and we're eating an appropriate amount of calories from whole plant food sources, then we're going to get that protein without any issue. So that is kind of the long and short of it when it comes to protein. There are different recommendations, and that's probably worth touching on as well, depending on what your goals are. So if you just want to have a healthy diet, you want to live a long time, you want to minimize your risk of chronic disease, just 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day is the recommendation there. That's per kilogram of healthy body weight. So if you're overweight, you don't have to eat more protein because of that. It's sort of based on what your ideal weight would be. And that's very, very easy to get on a plant-based diet, particularly if you are eating lots of whole foods like, beans, legumes, lentils, chickpeas, things of that nature, whole grains, even some vegetables, nuts and seeds contain protein as well. And so if you're eating sufficient calories from whole food sources, it's basically impossible to not get that much protein. Correct. Now, when it comes to kind of the body composition side of things, folks who have more fitness specific goals, like if you want to build muscle or maintain muscle mass while you're losing body fat, we do have a good body of evidence now that shows that higher protein intake can help with that. It's not like you won't be able to build any muscle if you don't have a higher protein intake, but having more does help. And so the recommendation there is probably actually about twice as much. It can be about 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Okay.
And so that is significantly more protein. And that's for folks who really want to make a dedicated kind of dietary intervention to really facilitate their fitness goals, like myself. And so that's something that I've been doing for many years. But again, I want to underscore, you absolutely do not have to do that. You don't need anywhere near that much protein just to be healthy and avoid protein deficiency and get everything that your body needs. But it's sort of up to you where on that spectrum you want to position yourself between just getting the sort of recommended intake there, ticking the box for protein, versus getting a little bit more can give you an edge if you're looking to build muscle and things of that nature. But I will say, for someone like myself, who has been eating a plant-based diet now for about 10 years, and paying very close attention to my diet during that time as well, I don't struggle at all to hit that 1.6 grams per kilogram. And actually, I've been exceeding it probably by like about 50 grams per day on average for many, many years now. And the reason for that is we've had a little bit of sort of ambiguity in the literature, or a little bit of, maybe getting a bit more protein could be better for building muscle, up to even like a gram per pound of body weight per day, which is 2.2 grams per kilogram. So that's even more again. And there's also a question about sort of the bioavailability of plant protein sources, where if you're consuming a lot of fiber with legumes and things like that, which is very healthy for us, by the way, perhaps, not every last little gram of protein is going to be absorbed. And so having a little bit extra can be a good idea for that reason, just to kind of cover that or act as a buffer, so to speak. So I've purposely been kind of exceeding the sort of recommended or necessary intake for building muscle, just to make sure absolutely, I'm not leaving any cards on the table. But the sort of the crystallization in the scientific literature nowadays is even that is probably too much. And the 1.6 grams per kilogram is plenty. And so for someone like myself, I weigh about 85 kilos at the moment. That's about 137 or so grams of protein per day for me. And I have been hitting over the last probably 5 or 10 years, because I track my diet very consistently every day. I've been getting more like 180 grams or 190 grams per day. So that's actually like a gram per pound of body weight per day. And for a while, that was considered kind of the gold standard for protein intake, where if you're getting that much, for sure, more is not going to help. And so I figured, well, I'm just going to do that and make sure that way I don't have to worry about protein. I'm not leaving any cards on the table. And so I've been eating, by most standards, a very high protein diet and a 100% plant-based diet for many years. And I have had good success with that in terms of building muscle, losing body fat, getting very lean, competing in multiple bodybuilding competitions, and winning as a vegan athlete multiple times. And so I've certainly had success in that area. And it's just a matter of knowing how to structure your diet and prioritizing certain foods that are higher in protein. And I will say for myself as well, I'm somewhat fortunate when it comes to bodybuilding in that I have a naturally kind of a higher metabolism. And so I consume a lot of calories just to maintain my body weight, or if I'm looking to build muscle, to gain weight, to be in a caloric surplus, then I would be eating like over 4,000 calories a day normally. And so it's a lot of food. Average person might eat closer to 2,000 calories in a day. But that does make it a little bit easier for me insofar as I don't have to struggle that much to get the protein in, because I'm just eating plenty of food throughout the day in general. And so I make sure I do get a good protein source in each of my meals. And that might be something like tofu or tempeh, beans, lentils, chickpeas, things of that nature are fantastic protein sources. They do contain some carbohydrates as well, but they're very healthy, complex carbohydrates. They're high in fiber, they're nutrient dense. And so they work very well in terms of fueling our bodies for any kind of training or athletic physical activity that we're doing, because carbohydrate is the preferred form of energy that the body uses for activity. And so I think it's important to keep sight of that, because sometimes people think about, you can't use beans for protein because they're high in carbs as well. It's like, yeah, but like eating carbs is a good idea, especially if you're an athlete. It's very, very important. And so you can absolutely incorporate those foods. And depending what your calorie requirements are, you might balance it. You might consider it as sort of a carb as well as a protein source. And you might not have as many other carb heavy foods in that meal. Like you could have a little bit less rice or potatoes or things like that if needed, if you're on lower calories. For someone like myself, most of the time I don't have to worry about that, because I've got plenty of calories to work with. But I've worked with many, many clients and athletes over the years years, and most of them do not have quite as high a calorie intake as I do, and they still are able to hit their protein intake without any issues. And it's just a matter of setting up your diet in a strategic fashion, prioritizing protein at each meal. And there are certain supplements that we can use, like plant-based protein powders. Of course, there's tons of them out there nowadays, many more than when I went vegan, 10 years ago. There were a few, and some of them better than others. Now there's just a dizzying array of plant-based proteins out there. So if that's something that you want to incorporate, lots of options to choose from. They're not super expensive. A lot of them taste really good. They mix well. They're very convenient to use. But I want to emphasize as well, they are absolutely not required. So if you're eating a plant-based diet, you do not have to supplement with protein. Even if you want to be an athlete and build muscle and lose fat and get jacked and do all that great stuff, protein powder can help as sort of a convenience item, just a quick, easy way to get a little bit more protein in, but it is not necessary by any stretch.
Amazing. That was going to be my next question. Would you recommend any plant-based proteins? But the long and the short of what you've said is, if you're an average person wanting to adopt a vegan or a plant-based diet, and if you're getting enough calories, protein is just not even something that you have to think about. In fact, you should be thinking about maybe like getting enough fiber. Would that be correct?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was something that I wanted to touch on as well. A lot of people, especially when you mention you're on a plant-based diet, they immediately kind of get their PhDs in nutrition and start asking you all these questions: where do you get your protein, and so on. A very tiny fraction of the population is actually deficient in protein. When was the last time you heard about someone having protein deficiency?
Never,
it's basically unheard of in countries where people get enough
Correct.
to eat. And so we don't have to worry about that. It's something like 3% of the population is actually protein deficient. However, there is another nutrient that 97% of the population does not get enough of, and that is fiber. And fiber is only found in plant foods, and specifically concentrated in whole plant foods. So things like whole grains, legumes, vegetables, and greens, and all of those sorts of foods, which are among the healthiest, most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. But unfortunately, in the modern Western world, much of our food is kind of processed and packaged and stripped down, and so the fiber intake ends up being very, very low. And I think the statistics are pretty disheartening nowadays, where the average person gets maybe like 15 grams of fiber in a day or something like that. And if we look back at sort of like to the ancestral times with hunter-gatherers, our ancestors that were foraging for food and eating predominantly plants, the fiber intake at that time was closer to 100 grams per day, or more. And so it's like an order of magnitude higher. And I will say, because I keep track of my diet on a daily basis anyway, that's something that I like to do. I know how much fiber I'm getting, and I actually do hit that 100 grams per day very regularly, and I eat lots of whole grains and legumes and things of that nature, and it's easy for me to get that in. And I'm not saying everyone needs to eat 100 grams of fiber per day, but if you're eating more whole plant foods, that's where it's going to come from, versus if you're eating a diet that's based around processed foods and animal products, and that's where we have a situation where, unfortunately, 97% of the population, at least in the Western world, is not getting enough fiber.
Yeah, good answer. But that's interesting about the ancients, getting 100 grams. I didn't know that. I'm going to ask you a sort of a controversial question in regards to fiber as well. There's a craze at the moment of the lion diet, carnivore diet. I'm sure you've heard of, and I've had many creative discussions with people online, respectfully as I can.
Yeah.
What do you think is going on here? Because from what I can see, we have got at least 7 years of peer-reviewed research, data, decades upon decades of, some people might argue they're observational data, but there's something. Whereas I look at the other camp, and I don't like to use, our camp and their camp. But when we're talking about the carnivore diet, it's just a bunch of anecdotes, and I might be wrong. Maybe you've heard something. I'm asking them, please provide me some sort of research, peer-reviewed research that I can look into to validate your saying that cholesterol doesn't matter, stuff like that. Any thoughts on this subject? Is this a craze at the moment?
Yeah, I would say that it is. And it's interesting if we sort of zoom out our perspective a little bit, looking at sort of diet culture, like over a period of years or even decades, what the carnivore diet nowadays is, I would say, is sort of the latest iteration of the overall trope, which is a low carb diet.
Yes, I agree.
And it's the most extreme possible variation of that, at least that anyone's come up with so far. And second to that would be like a ketogenic diet, and then like a paleo diet and various other ones, which are in varying degrees less extreme. But yeah, the carnivore diet that's basically what it is. It's a very basically no carb diet, because animal products actually don't contain carbohydrates. And you can survive on that. Carbohydrates are not an essential nutrient. Protein and fat are. And so if you were not to eat protein or fat, you would eventually run into deficiency and health issues from that. But you will absolutely run into health issues on the carnivore diet if you stick with that for a long time as well, because it's by definition a fiber-free diet. And fiber is super health promoting. It's necessary for good digestive function and keeping things moving down there, and minimizing the risk of things like colon cancer and stuff like that. And even an anecdote, which you can edit this out if you want to, but before we got on the podcast just now, I went into the bathroom and there was somebody in there, and the door was closed right to the stall, and I could hear this guy just straining to go to the toilet, and I was like, oh man, dude, like, I don't know too much about you, but I know you're not eating enough fiber.
100%.
And so unfortunately that's like the norm nowadays, versus, if you're on a whole food plant-based diet, it's just not something that we have to worry about. So yeah. So that was just something I thought was interesting, sort of relevant to this conversation that we're having. But coming back to the idea of sort of the carnivore diet or ketogenic diet, I think Dr. Michael Greger, who you mentioned earlier, and of course he's a fantastic resource in the evidence-based and plant-based nutrition community, and his take on it, which I thought was pretty funny, was the carnivore diet is kind of like if the internet troll were a diet. That's what it would be, right? Where it's just people are kind of like thumbing their nose at the evidence, they're just doing their own thing, and it's just kind of like the opposite of what the best available balance of evidence actually shows in many respects. And to the point that you made earlier about, is there evidence, where is the peer-reviewed literature and so on? As far as I'm aware, it does not exist. So, you mentioned that you would like to see it. I'd like to see it too. I don't think that those carnivore folks are going to be providing a lot of citations at the bottom of their social media comments, unfortunately, to studies that are validating their claims, because those studies aren't out there. It is highly anecdotal. Another thing that I will mention, though, is when it comes to the carnivore diet or ketogenic diet or paleo diet, there are some folks that experience benefits, or they experience certain health issues that they had that cleared up when they switched to it. And so they're like, oh my God, this diet has these miraculous properties. And I believe the reason for that is essentially what it is it's an elimination diet. Exactly. And so they're cutting out all processed food by definition of the carnivore diet. And it's possible they were eating something that they were allergic to or didn't agree with them, and then they feel better when they stop eating it. And that's good, but that doesn't mean that eating only meat is the healthiest way to eat. And we know that it is not. So there's something to be said for that. But at the same time, it's like, you could eliminate foods and see what was the trigger, and then you can actually add healthy foods back in that you can tolerate, and you'll have a much healthier diet as a result.
100% agree. And I think if there was a Venn diagram between these two diets, in the middle would be eliminating processed foods and junk, which is a good thing that, we can all agree on, do that. But then you can't just stick to, but again, I'm happy to see the evidence, show me the data. But at the moment, all I'm seeing is anecdotes, but, we're not here to argue with anyone. I want it to be a sort of a peaceful discussion as best as we can. And if you've got any comments, please do leave it, and happy to go back and forth as best as we can. But I guess what Forrest and I want is just peer-reviewed research that goes beyond a sample size of one, which unfortunately is not science. It's a bunch of anecdotes. But anyway, we'll move on to the next topic. In terms of going on a plant-based or a vegan diet, I often bump into people, and the number 2 objection that I get is going, I would love to, but I love cheese so much. My answer is, and you might not agree with me, and I've just gone, that's fine. Why don't you continue to eat cheese, but eliminate everything else? Then we can worry about the cheese later on. Like they're so sort of, it's like the all or nothing attitude, where I'm like going, you don't have to start off with that. I've done it because I know what I'm capable of. You don't have to do that. You can just maybe go, Monday nights, eat a clean, whole plant-based diet. Thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I think that is a great way for a lot of folks to go about making a transition to a more plant-based diet. It doesn't have to be black and white. It's a spectrum, and you can choose how far along it you want to position yourself wherever you feel comfortable. And it's also, for many folks, can be a good idea to gradually move in that direction. It doesn't have to be an overnight switch, although for some folks like yourself, that can work really well if you have that conviction, you know that it's what you want to do. Oftentimes when it comes to any kind of lifestyle or behavior change, doing it gradually makes it a little bit easier and more sustainable. sustainable. And so like
For the
you
gut
said,
health as well, you think?
for gut health and just for your lifestyle and knowing what to eat and figuring out different foods and what agrees with you and what you like and how to prepare different recipes and things of that nature. Going gradually just makes that whole process easier, more sustainable, more likely that people are going to stick with it and be successful. But coming back to what you mentioned about cheese specifically, there is something to that, and I'm sure you're aware of this. Reading Neil Barnard has a book, The Cheese Trap, exactly, and he talks about the casomorphins in cheese, which are highly addictive, similar to like morphine. The drug is addictive, and so there's similar compounds in dairy products and cheese in particular. And so that is an objection that I've heard from lots of people as well. It's like, I can't give up cheese. That's something I struggled with back when I went vegan. Like I shared at the beginning, the first time I was trying to adopt a fully plant-based diet, cheese was the thing I felt like I was really missing and wanting to eat pizza with my family and stuff like that. And that it made it difficult for me. Eventually I overcame that, and I'm so glad I did, because I feel much better now physically and sort of cognitively without having the dairy products in my diet. But for sure, it's a real thing that people struggle with. I don't want to invalidate that. It absolutely is true. But like you were saying, you can make that gradual transition. You can cut out other animal products. And the good news is nowadays, and it's getting better all the time, we have a vast array of plant-based cheeses to choose from as well. They're not exactly the same as dairy-based cheese, of course, but some of them are pretty darn close. And like, for example, we're fortunate living in Melbourne. We can go to Red Sparrow Pizza and get like an amazing plant-based pizza. Actually, a few years ago, Red Sparrow won best pizzeria in Melbourne, not vegan pizza, but for pizza in general. And it's a 100% vegan plant-based restaurant where they use vegan cheese, and it's amazing. I've had it many times. I imagine you may have been there yourself as well.
I actually haven't, so thanks for mentioning
Definitely
that.
worth checking out Red Sparrow.
Yeah.
But that's just one of many examples where nowadays it's so easy to adopt a plant-based diet because we actually want for nothing any comfort food or something that you really enjoy eating. You don't have to give it up. It's just as simple as like, if you're in the grocery store, instead of getting the dairy milk, you go like this, you get the soy milk instead. It's very, very easy to do that. Certain products like cheese, maybe a little bit more difficult to replicate, but that is getting better all the time. And what I would say to folks as well is just try it out, moving in that direction, having a little bit less cheese, try some plant-based options. You might find one that you enjoy. But overall, the sort of the bottom line is it's not black and white, right? The closer you can get to that,
correct,
the more health benefits you're going to reap, and the better for the environment and for the animals as well, of course. And so any progress or movement in that direction is a good thing.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, we in this day and age, it's always black and white, but it doesn't have to be like that at all. Gradually, whatever you're comfortable with, you can just do it. And as you said, sometimes it does take people time. Like, I've got a Sri Lankan background, and even for me, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to eat? But it's so easy. I mean, I know you've got, with your parents having that Indian influence, they know there's chickpeas, lentils, greens, there's legumes, all of this stuff can be put onto a rice and you can eat that. But even when I went, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to eat? And it was just such a nonsense question, but it just takes a little bit of time, little bit of thought into planning your meals, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's a great point. And just having that, taking a little bit of time, educate yourself, learning the tools along the way. And a fantastic resource, which you might be aware of as well, is from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM, Neil Barnard's organization. And they have their program called the 21-Day Kickstart, which is a free program anyone can sign up for. They run it every single month. And all you do is you opt in, you give them your email address, and they will send you guided steps, I believe, every day for 21 days, kind of walking you through the process of transitioning to a whole food plant-based diet. So it breaks it down into kind of bite-sized, no pun intended, but bite-sized pieces, and really makes it manageable, and they sort of hold your hand throughout that process. And that's a program they've been running for many years, and they've had tremendous success with it. And the nice thing about the 21 days as well is by the end of it, if you actually commit to it and do it and eat plant-based for 21 days, that's enough time to where you will notice a difference in how you feel, and you will feel much better, and you'll have, probably various issues like digestion or other things that may start to improve. A lot of folks report like their skin clears up, they have more energy, they feel better. And so then that's the strongest motivation in the world to continue with it. And so that's oftentimes just breaking that inertia, kind of overcoming the initial resistance or hesitancy to changing what you're used to, because food and what we eat is a really fundamental part of like culture and our family traditions and everything like that. It's really ingrained. And so to change that is daunting and intimidating. And oftentimes people want to kind of hold on to what they know and what's familiar. But there is a lot of benefit to be had there if you can kind of incrementally move in that direction. And so doing it using a program like the 21-day Kickstart, which is a free resource, it's available to anyone with an internet connection, it can certainly make that a lot easier. And so that's something I would recommend to anyone who's interested in moving in this direction. Of course, you can also reach out to someone like myself, who's kind of a health and fitness nutrition professional in the plant-based space. And I offer free consultations. I'm happy to chat with anyone on the phone, answer any questions that you have, try and point them in the right direction, and just make that transition easier. There's no obligation to pay me or sign up for my services. I want to help people make that transition. That's a big part of my purpose and passion with my work. And so, you can include my details, of course, below the episode. Anyone is out there, if they have questions about this stuff, please reach out to me. It's what I do for a living. I've been, vegetarian for the last 33 years, vegan for the last 10. Health and fitness is my purpose and passion, and that is what I'm here to do, is to help folks make that transition and make it easier and more sustainable.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Forrest. And I highly recommend you, because you can probably see from Forrest's demeanor how much of a kind person he is. So he is the real deal. So don't be afraid to reach out to him. And I will include all of Forrest's details in the show notes. A few more questions. I hope you don't mind.
Of course.
If someone is actually, if we can talk about the bodybuilders, how much does creatine play in that side of things? Because I get asked all the time, and I'm like going, I'm not a professional, but this is what I think. I suppose I would want your opinion as a professional.
For sure. Yeah, good question. So creatine is one of the few sort of fitness supplements out there that has been studied extensively at this point, and it has a pretty compelling body of research and evidence now that shows that it is safe and effective for what it does. And what it does is it actually provides some modest but tangible benefits when it comes to strength training, like your actual performance in your workouts can increase a little bit if you supplement with creatine, recovery can improve, muscle growth and strength outcomes can be enhanced by supplementing with it. And so it is something that I use, and I have used it for many years. A lot of my clients use it as well. It's not going to make or break your progress. It's not required by any stretch, but it is one of the few supplements on the market which I think is actually worth the money if you want to go that route. And if you don't want to, and you don't want to take any supplements other than, like you were saying, vitamin B12 and things like that, you absolutely don't have to. But creatine, it is worth noting, the body naturally produces it. And so even if you don't supplement creatine, you will have some, and it's naturally occurring in your muscle tissues, and it's involved in the process of kind of cellular energy production in muscles. So if you're doing strenuous activity like strength training, creatine is involved in kind of that recovery, even in between the reps as you're working out. And so if you supplement with it, basically you're just saturating the stores that are already there, topping off the tanks with the creatine inside your muscle tissue. And that can give you a little bit of a performance boost to the point where, maybe you get 11 reps in a set instead of 10, something like that. So it's, not a huge benefit, but it is extant for sure. Like that, there is some benefit to be had there. Another thing that's worth noting as well is for folks like you and me who are eating a plant-based diet, there is creatine in meat, because meat is animal muscle tissue, which is, I think, a little gross if you think about it, but that's what it is. And so creatine is naturally occurring in our muscles and in the muscles of animals as well. So if you're eating that, you'll get, a couple extra grams of creatine per day potentially. And that, if you're on a plant-based diet, it does not mean that you're going to be deficient in creatine. The body makes all it needs, but it does mean if you're interested in supplementing it, interestingly enough, you might actually notice a little bit more benefit versus somebody who's eating a lot of meat, because you'll be getting that little bit extra creatine that you didn't have before. So that's kind of my take on it when it comes to creatine as far as from a fitness and athletic performance standpoint. There is also some interesting research coming out in recent times about kind of cognitive benefits and things of that nature to do with creatine. I would say it's sort of maybe a little too early to make a definitive statement in that regard. But as far as the strength and performance side of things, that's pretty well established at this point. And so again, I don't recommend a lot of supplements, hardly any. In fact, I'm very skeptical of most supplements, but that is one of the few that I personally use and some of my clients do as well.
Amazing. Okay, that's a good answer. Thank you. You would have heard of John McDougall and the starch solution. Can you sort of give me your thoughts on this? How much carbohydrates we should be having, or is it just a matter of measuring your macros on a daily basis? Even if you're, I guess if you're the average person, you might not have to, right? But if you're going to the gym and actually wanting to do something, it's worthwhile doing. But just talk about, I guess, carbs.
Yeah, for sure. I think carbs are a macronutrient where they get a lot of hate, unfortunately, especially like in the mainstream media and stuff like that. And that in part is why these low carb diets like the ketogenic diet or carnivore diet that we talked about earlier, in part that's why they're so popular. But I think it's very important to sort of differentiate. Not all carbs are created equal. Some are very healthy, some not so much. And so if you're getting your carbs from things like whole grains and legumes, beans and brown rice and quinoa and things like that, that's going to be super healthy, kind of clean burning fuel. And that is, like I said earlier, that's your body's preferred source of energy. If you're on a ketogenic diet, the body can switch over and use fat instead, but that's not sort of what the evolutionary pathway was designed for. That's like the emergency backup one if there are no carbs available. And it's actually interesting to note too, when it comes to athletic performance and folks who are interested in training, eating a low carb diet is going to negatively impact your performance because you just don't have that energy available the way that you would if you had more carbs coming in. So from a nutrition standpoint, whether you're looking at it from kind of the long-term health, longevity, like kind of the whole food plant-based diet, but also I'm involved in the evidence-based fitness nutrition community. And it's an interesting intersection there because those two communities don't agree about everything, like how much protein you should eat, that 0.8 grams versus the 1.6. But both are in agreement that eating a low carb diet is probably not a good idea because there's so many benefits from a health standpoint if you're getting your carbohydrates from those whole food sources that I was talking about, but also from a performance standpoint, if you're an athlete, having more carbs coming in is going to help you train harder, have more energy, recover better, and that's going to lead to better outcomes, whether you're looking to build muscle or lose fat or get better at your sport or whatever it may be. So I'm someone where I'm an advocate of eating plenty of carbohydrates. It matters where they come from. So you want to be sourcing them from whole plant foods. If you're getting a lot of white flour and white sugar and things like that in your diet, those are not going to be healthy. They're basically empty calories and they can be pro-inflammatory and have negative effects on blood sugar levels and all sorts of issues like that. And so we want to be eating, again, whole foods, foods that are close to the way they fell off a tree or came up out of the ground or that sort of thing, not something in a box with a paragraph of ingredients. It's all kind of not resembling the original form that it came in, if that makes sense. So
yeah, it does. Okay.
For sure. So if somebody says, well, I'm eating a low carb diet, at least that means they're not eating a lot of white flour and white sugar. So that is healthy. Like that's better than eating those foods. Like we were talking about earlier with the carnivore diet or ketogenic diet, that is an upside. Like if you stop eating those processed junk foods, good. But that doesn't mean that carbs categorically are bad. And in general, there's a lot of benefit to be had from consuming them. Another thing that I will share as well, and this kind of ties into the whole athletic performance side of things, carbohydrates, when you consume them, are actually stored in your body as glycogen, which is the storage form of carbohydrate that the body uses then for kind of a readily accessible form of energy. That's stored in your liver and in your muscle tissue. And so when you're using your muscles, that gets burned. But if you start eating a low carb diet, or basically you stop eating carbs, that's the first source of carbohydrate that your body has access to. And so it will burn off all of your stored glycogen. And the body can have up to like half a kilo, like 500 grams of glycogen that is stored between your liver and your muscle tissue, depending on how big of a person you are. But that results then in instant weight loss, or almost instant weight loss, when you start eating a low carbohydrate diet, because all that glycogen gets burned off. And it's not that you're actually losing body fat, you're just burning off that stored carbohydrate. And the part that's really the kicker is, with each gram of carbohydrate that's stored as glycogen, there's about 3 grams of water that's also stored. And so if you multiply that out, half a kilo, but then the 3 grams of water, you could have 2 kilos potentially of just water weight and carbohydrate weight that you lose in the first few days if you start a low carb diet. And many people report this when they're eating a ketogenic or a paleo diet or a carnivore diet, like, man, I lost 5 kilos in the first week. It's like, cool, but that wasn't 5 kilos of body fat. And if you actually do a body composition scan, your lean body mass actually went down during that time because your muscles are depleted, all that glycogen and water is gone. And the other thing is, if you start eating carbohydrates again in the future, which most people do because not eating them is pretty unsustainable, that weight's going to come right back because it was just water and glycogen to begin with. So that's something I just wanted to point out.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't aware of that, and they're like, oh, low carb diet's great, I lost all this weight quickly. It's like, yeah, but it wasn't true tissue weight loss. You weren't losing body fat or even losing muscle, just water and the stored glycogen. And so that's something that's worth being aware of.
No, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I had known it happens, but I didn't know why it happens. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Absolutely.
In terms of, this is more of a intangible question, Forrest. I mean, when people look at you, they're not going to think, hey, look at this frail little vegan. I mean, I've known, you might remember the Game Changers documentary, right? So there was a bunch of people that I associated with ended up going, oh, this is so cool. I'm gonna, try the plant-based diet and go vegan. Boom, boom, boom. A couple of weeks go by, and I talk to them and goes, hey man, how's it going? Oh, my mate made fun of me, so I stopped. I'm going, come on, dude.
Yeah.
Like, I've never had that problem because I've done my own thing. Other people's opinions don't matter. I mean, not matter, but, their reflection of me it's their own thing, right?
Yeah.
I lead my own life. How do you handle it? And because this is something that a lot of people struggle with because they think about other people's opinions and it really matters to them. I think it's a huge thing that people don't want to go down this path. Even if they see the evidence, they think that, being a man is associated with eating meat.
Yep.
Thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. And that's something I certainly have encountered some, in my sort of life and journey as a plant-based athlete as well. Not too much, fortunately the circles that I grew up in, people are more receptive to it. A lot of folks like in my parents' community are on the same spiritual path. And so vegetarianism is kind of the norm there. But certainly like other friends that I have that are part of more mainstream culture and stuff would maybe, take a little dig here and there about being a soy boy or whatever. But I like you, I'm not too fazed by that. I'm doing my own thing. And I kind of laugh it off, and it's easy for me to do that because I'm usually bigger, more muscular, and stronger than the people who are saying those things. It's all
funny, right?
Whatever, man. Like, enjoy. But yeah, for sure, there's something to that. And it's interesting, like you mentioned, the idea of, people have this misconception that you have to eat meat to be manly and stuff like that. And I was actually interviewed a few years ago for a piece that they did in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age.
Okay.
And it was funny at the time because they were talking about me as a plant-based athlete. And also there's this program, which actually is going on right now. We're in the month of May, which is called No Meat May. And that's started by some folks, I believe, who are based in Sydney. And kind of like the 21-day Kickstart. It's a phenomenal program that's designed to help kind of get people inspired to eat plant-based and give them the resources to do that. And so one year I teamed up with them. They did this whole interview and piece in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, which was fantastic because, it's bringing more attention to the kind of plant-based eating and also breaking some of those stereotypes and misconceptions that you have to eat meat to be fit and strong and healthy and those sorts of things. And so I was really happy to be a part of that. But it was just interesting to see some of the sort of backlash and comments on social media and stuff like that came out. And, I try to sort of stay above the fray with that stuff, but I just happened to go on Facebook and I could see the Sydney Morning Herald had shared it on their Facebook page. And the headline of the article, which I thought was hilarious, was meat-free diets are unmanly, ? Someone forgot to tell Forrest, and then they had a picture of me there. And so I was meant to be breaking stereotypes, which I thought was great. And then one of the comments that I saw, which actually really made me laugh, was, well, at least he knows now, and that's the important thing. I thought that was just hilarious. And other people, of course, in the comments were talking about how I was on steroids and just all these, which of course I'm not. And so I had a good time actually going and replying to some of the comments there and being really polite. And friendly, but just debunking some of the false claims that people were making. And so for sure, that was an instance where, some of that pushback from kind of mainstream culture was there. But I do not, again, like you were saying, I don't let it get to me, particularly stuff like that online with social media. It's so easy for someone to sit behind a keyboard and just type out whatever kind of vitriol or kind of trolling type comment that they want to. But in those situations, the way I look at it is think about kind of where the other person is at, where they're coming from. I think if you're on the internet writing negative comments about anyone, you're probably not in a great place in your own life. And so I deploy compassion towards people like that. I'm yeah, word up. I wish you the best, but I'm just going to keep doing my own thing. And it's kind of I don't care about what the haters think. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, focusing on the positive. And there are lots of people that are receptive to that and that are inspired by that. And those are the people that I want to talk to. I'm not interested in butting heads with somebody or getting into a comment war on social media because I don't have time for that. But also it's those probably aren't the people that you're going to win over anyway, right? But there's lots of people out there who are receptive. And so by being somebody who's visibly strong and fit and healthy and thriving on a plant-based diet, which is what I really strive to do, I try to embody that every day with everything I do, is being a walking billboard for the vegan lifestyle, going to the gym. Like I said yesterday, every time I'm in the gym, I'm wearing vegan hoodies, vegan t-shirts, stuff like that. People see me, they come up to me, they ask questions, and that's a great way to get a conversation going because it's inspiring. They say, hey man, you look good. What are you doing? You're vegan? Where do you get your protein? Blah, blah, blah. And even if it's the same question I've been asked a million times, I'm happy to answer it. I'm happy to meet them where they are and try and also be really friendly and engaging and not try to beat them over the head with any statistics or anything like that. So that hopefully it will give them some good information, some food for thought, but also I want them to come away from that interaction thinking, hey, that guy's a vegan and he's also a nice guy. And he's not like some militant, in my face type of person. He's just a chill dude who happens to eat a plant-based diet and he looks pretty good.
Yeah, and he doesn't hurt animals, right?
Exactly.
What's wrong with that?
Exactly. So that's kind of how I approach that whole side of things.
No, that's awesome. I mean, I genuinely feel sad. We as a society depend so much on other people's opinions. And, these guys are like tradies and stuff, the ones that I was talking to you about before, where, big muscular guys, they could be on those firefighter magazines, right? So in terms of physical, they look good. Like when they're in their peak, and I don't know what their blood works like. That's a different story. But when they look that good, why do they care about other people's opinions? Just be you, do the right thing. But often I think it's a societal thing, and it's sad that I guess strong men get affected by this. Physically strong, but mentally maybe not so much.
Yeah, well, I think, as you said, it is a societal thing for sure, but the times are changing, and I've seen those changes happening, in the last 10 years since I've been vegan, and it's one of those things where I think it's exponentially accelerating, actually, because the information is out there, and it's easier to find than ever now at the internet, and like you mentioned, Dr. Michael Greger, Neil Barnard, lots of their colleagues, tons of great resources out there available to anyone who's interested for free, and so I've had lots of people come to me who are interested in transitioning into a plant-based diet, and it's because they've been researching it, and they have, a family history of heart disease or whatever it may be, and they come across the compelling body of literature and evidence that's out there that shows that like a whole food plant-based diet, for example, is the only diet that has ever been proven in the peer-reviewed nutrition literature to reverse heart disease. And heart disease is the #1 cause of death in the Western world. It's the most likely reason why statistically, not you or I specifically, but why we or anyone else that we know is most likely to die is heart disease. And if you eat a whole food plant-based diet, it can not only prevent but reverse heart disease as well as other chronic conditions like diabetes and cancer and on down the list. And so like Dr. Greger likes to say, if that's all that a plant-based diet could do, shouldn't that be the default diet until proven otherwise, right? And so that information is out there. It's becoming more available all the time. And more people are availing themselves of it. And so that change is happening. And I think it's accelerating, even though you hear things, more people are eating meat and whatever, everything kind of goes in cycles, right? So like the carnivore diet is popular at the moment, but there's still more people that are going and adopting a vegetarian, vegan, or plant-based diet all the time in the background. Doesn't always get as much media attention, but that change is happening for sure. And I'm really glad to be a part of it and be able to the extent that I can, help other people make that transition easier process, make it sustainable, make it something that they can maintain for the long term. And I feel like it's actually, I would be doing a disservice to humanity in general, as well as the planet and the animals, if I didn't do that, because I've been blessed with the upbringing, the background that I have, the years of experience with training and nutrition, and this knowledge and these tools that I have that can actually transform people's lives and their health and reverse chronic disease and help you get in great shape and look good with your shirt off and all that sort of, maybe superficial stuff, but it also matters to people, myself included. And so I want to share that with the world. I want to broadcast that as far as wide as I can. And that's why I'm grateful for this opportunity to chat with you, have this conversation, hopefully, reach some of your viewers, and they will be receptive to that information. Or even if they're not, it's one of those things where sometimes it's a compounding, it's accumulation of hearing something or little bits and pieces here and there and over again. And you have to hear it enough times, and then eventually something clicks, right?
Absolutely.
And then you start to make that change. And so even if you say something or somebody sees something and they're just completely dismiss it, it's still like every little bit helps, right? It all adds up. And
it all 100% adds up. Like you mentioned before, looking great is amazing, but what about internally, in terms of how's your blood work, all of that stuff, in terms of internally, how do you feel? Or not feel, but how is about blood work, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question as well. And that's something especially I think is interesting to look at when it comes to like the bodybuilding and fitness world, because there is a bit of a separation there, right? Between like somebody can look really fit and lean and muscular and jacked and so on, and their blood work might actually be in shambles, particularly, folks, if they're using performance enhancing drugs and stuff like that. Oftentimes, there's major negative health effects to the point where like you can shave shave years off your life doing that, but you look great in the moment. And so that's, a lot of people make that trade-off. Maybe they're aware of the trade-off, maybe they're not. But for me, it's something that I'm very conscious of, wanting to balance kind of performance as an athlete, but also the long-term health and longevity side of things. And so I do get blood work done on a regular basis. I say at least once a year or every 6 months is a good idea. I'd recommend that to anyone on general principles, whether you're following a plant-based diet or not. But it's a good idea just to keep, tabs on your levels there. And whenever I do that, the cholesterol is always sort of in the ideal range there, because if you're eating a plant-based diet, by definition, you're not consuming dietary cholesterol. But I also try to limit intake of saturated fat and trans fat, but those are the other dietary factors that can raise cholesterol. Again, higher cholesterol is going to be causative of heart disease, and we want to keep that risk to a minimum if we want to live a long time. And so cholesterol, for example, is one that I'm always keeping that in check with my diet and lifestyle. Eating lots of fiber as well can help reduce cholesterol levels. If you are somebody where genetically you're just prone to have higher cholesterol, which some people are, the solution is still the same. It's eat a whole food plant-based diet, but you can lean into that even more, eating specific foods, like oats and okra and those kind of soluble fiber foods that really can actually pull cholesterol out of your bloodstream. And so that's what I would recommend to anyone who wants to actually improve their blood work, bring down cholesterol. Same thing with blood sugar, like folks who have type 2 diabetes. That can also be reversed with a plant-based diet. And this is one that, if I can go down a little bit of a tangent on, when it comes to diabetes, it's another area where carbohydrates oftentimes get a bad rap, and people think, oh, diabetes is a disease where your blood sugar is too high and carbohydrates get turned into sugar, and so if you're eating carbohydrates, that's bad and that's going to give you diabetes. And that's sort of a very surface level look of like, this is what the symptom is, so therefore I should stop eating carbs. But what we actually know now, which is really interesting, and you probably know this as well, is worth sharing with the viewers, is what causes type 2 diabetes is actually having too much fat in your body, too much body fat and too much fat in circulation. And that is actually going to gum up and kind of clog the works there on your cells, where the insulin is meant to go in and actually allow blood sugar to be taken up into your cells where it can be used and metabolized as energy. And so if you have too much body fat, that actually is what causes then the blood sugar levels to increase and to get into that range where you can have pre-diabetes or even full-blown type 2 diabetes. And the solution to that is not to stop eating carbs, although if you're eating lots of sugar or white flour, for sure, stop eating those, eat whole food sources, but actually eating a whole food plant-based diet, a lower fat diet, losing body fat, and that's what's going to allow the insulin to then go into your cells, do its job, allow the carbohydrates to be taken up, and potentially get rid of your diabetes. And that is something that can happen. That's been studied as well, like Dr. Neil Barnard has done. I'm sure you've probably seen like the Geico insurance company and those studies that they've done very, very effectively and well documented. But most people don't know that. And so that's another area where it's like people, diabetes bad, don't eat carbs because that's going to give you diabetes. It's like, well, there's a little bit more to it than that, So.
No, that's a really good answer. And Dr. Neil Barnard's actually got a book coming out on, particularly on diabetes. It's interesting that you mentioned the bloods because, I'm in my 40s now and I get my bloods done every 6 to 12 months and they're always perfect. Not because, I've got perfect genes. No, I've got diabetes in my family, heart disease, cancers.
Yeah.
You name it, I've got it. The only reason I'm standing upright and my bloods are always perfect is because I eat well and I try and exercise. That's the only reason. It's not a magic pill. So everyone says, not everyone actually. I know a lot of people when they reach their late 30s, 40s, maybe even 50s, and goes, oh, it's part of old age. That's why I've got high cholesterol. That's why I got high blood pressure.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's diet and lifestyle choices that are 80% of what's causing this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as Dr. Michael Greger says, what is it? The
genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger.
Bingo.
Yep.
That's it.
I wanted to say that as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's exactly right. Yeah. And like he says as well, it's an interesting point. It's like, people say heart disease runs in my family or diabetes or whatever. It's like, well, your dietary pattern also runs in your family. And so that has a lot to do with it. And even if you do have, there are genetic factors for sure. Even if you do have a family history of, being predisposed to cancer or having certain genetic mutation that increases the risk for that, that doesn't mean you should throw up your hands and give up.
Correct.
It means double down even further on eating a healthy diet, an exquisitely healthy diet as well. Dr. Greger describes it, because you have, even if that deck is already stacked against you, you can reshuffle it with your diet and with your lifestyle. And so that's, obviously that's what you're doing. That's what I try to do as well. Like my mom is one of 4 siblings. 3 out of 4 of them have had cancer. I don't want to have cancer, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to eat a whole food plant-based diet. I'm going to keep active. I'm going to get lots of sleep, keep stress levels manageable. I'm going to do everything I can to stack the deck in my favor. Absolutely. And it's not 100% in my control, but a lot of it is. And I am going to take ownership of what is in my control. It's like, Dr. Kim Williams says, who used to be the head of the American College of Cardiology. You're probably familiar with his famous quote. He said, "I don't mind dying. I just don't want it to be my fault." And so that's how I'm living my life as well.
I love that. And another quote that he said is, if you're a cardiologist and you're not a vegan, you shouldn't be a cardiologist. Something like that.
I think it was there's cardiologists who are vegans, and then there are the ones that haven't read the science.
Or something like that. Yes.
Like those
Exactly. He's a good resource as well.
For sure.
Any other people that you admire in terms of the plant-based world, doctors and so forth? We've already mentioned Dr. Michael Greger, Neil Barnard, and you've mentioned Dr. Kim Williams as well.
For sure, yeah. So other kind of titans in that field, Dr. Dean Ornish for sure is worth mentioning, and he's the one who's actually conducted like the lifestyle heart trial showing that heart disease can be reversed with the whole food plant-based diet and lifestyle. Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, of course, also one of the pioneers in reversing heart disease and still works with people. I think he's like in his 90s now or something, and still working with people and actually reversing late stage heart disease through dietary intervention. So he's another one that's certainly, very noteworthy. And there's lots of others out there and, more kind of joining the fight all the time, which is fantastic. But those are, certainly some of the ones that I've looked up to for many years.
That's amazing. His son, Rip Esselstyn, is actually becoming a bit more of an advocate now, and he knows his stuff. I recently watched a friendly debate with him and Dr. Davis about oil. And I don't know who the winner was, but I think the no oil camp won there. Any thoughts on that in regards to oil versus no oil? I think they were actually debating not oil itself, but extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah, for sure. And so like for myself personally, I eat a whole food plant-based diet predominantly. That's the way I've eaten for many years because I do believe, and I think the evidence supports that's the healthiest way to eat. And so oil is a processed food, sort of by definition, like oil doesn't grow out of the ground. And so I personally, in my own cooking at home, I don't use oil. Now and again, if I go out to a restaurant, maybe once a week or less, I might have something with oil in it because you can't always control it. But certainly for myself, I do not use oil. It does seem like there's some evidence coming out nowadays, maybe showing that extra virgin olive oil specifically might have some health benefits. And I think if you're going to include oil in your diet, sort of like with cheese, for example, if you're like, I just can't give up my oil, extra virgin olive oil is probably the best bet. Like I would say it's the least harmful. Maybe there's some upside there. That's sort of the jury's still out on that. But for sure, like when it comes to the more processed and refined oils, I steer clear of those. Coconut oil, interestingly, is one that I specifically avoid, even though in certain circles it has sort of like this health halo of like, oh, coconut oil is going to cure what ails you. The thing about coconut oil is it's very high in saturated fat. And you can tell because if you see it at room temperature, it's solid, right? It's saturated fat. And saturated fat, again, like we were talking about earlier, is one of the dietary factors that can raise your cholesterol. And basically, although there's a few more steps involved, you can have that sitting inside your arteries, then kind of gumming up the works. And that's how people have heart attacks and strokes and so on. So I would definitely avoid coconut oil. Specifically, palm fruit oil is the other one that's pretty high in saturated fat, not as high as coconut oil. Those tend to mainly be in like processed foods or baked goods and stuff like that, although some people do cook with coconut oil. So if you're doing that, I would say, try extra virgin olive oil. That's going to be better for you for sure. Best bet might not be to have any oil at all, but certainly there's kind of gradations there as well.
Yeah, good answer. I'm in the same thinking as you. If you can avoid it, avoid it because it is a processed food at the end of the day. Because, why not eat the whole olives, right? If you really get the nutrition that way. Coconut milk?
Yeah, so coconut milk, I would say, is a little bit less sort of insidious than coconut oil just because it's mostly water, right? And so there's probably a little bit of saturated fat in there. You can read the ingredients, of course, but like I wouldn't be making a lot of coconut cream based curries and stuff like that. I know it's delicious every once in a while.
Guilty.
It's fun to have that, go out to a restaurant or whatever, but in my own cooking, it's not something I would use a lot.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for your time, Forrest. I do want to touch on some of your own accomplishments, if that's okay.
Sure.
What are you doing at the moment in terms of, are you, competing or just doing private clients at the moment? What's keeping you busy?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm not currently like sort of preparing for a bodybuilding competition or anything like that. Last time I competed was in October of 2023, and that was with the Vegan Strong Plant Built team. I'm kind of wearing my team uniform today. I always love to wear that. And that was actually in the US at the Mr. America competition in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And that was a phenomenal opportunity to get together with that team of vegan athletes that I'm a part of. And basically the goal there is to go in at a really kind of a high caliber sporting event where Mr. America includes not only bodybuilding, but powerlifting and CrossFit and strongman and kettlebell sport. We have these 5 different disciplines, and we had vegan athletes from all over the world, mostly from the US, but we have folks coming from Europe and Canada. And like I flew there from Australia, all to compete together. And so that's something where I really am, I feel fortunate to have the opportunity to be a part of that team. And it's something larger than myself, and going in there and kind of making a strong statement and doing well in the competition, which we did. I think we came away with 4 dozen medals and trophies. Amazing. Or something like that at the end of our little team of vegan athletes going up against hundreds of omnivorous competitors. And so that's something that I've been privileged to do twice. I competed with Team Plant Built back in 2017 as well. And that was actually my first bodybuilding competition that I ever did, and it was with Plant Built, and I actually won my class, and I was so happy and proud. That's still a highlight in terms of my competitive career for sure. And then at Mr. America, it was a stacked lineup. I made the top 3 in my class, so I was very happy about that. And we had a lot of other competitors that did really well and brought home a lot of first place finishes, lots of hardware as well. So yeah, that was the last time I competed. I may compete again in the future, but like I mentioned, I'm sort of transitioning my focus now as I'm sort of approaching my mid-30s. I'm very interested in longevity, and there is a little bit of a trade-off there between sort of doing a full send on bodybuilding versus on longevity. And like bodybuilding's cool, I enjoy the sport, but it's not like, there's some folks where that's like their passion. They really love to compete and all the pageantry that goes along with it, and tanning and hair removal and all of it. I could leave that stuff. I like to compete for that reason, being a part of the team, making that statement as a vegan athlete. But I think there's a lot of other ways that I can do that advocacy as well, perhaps with a little bit less of a trade-off there in the longevity department. So I may compete again in the future, I may not, but certainly I'm very active, and I intend to continue to be as an advocate, and like you said, working with clients one-on-one as well. And that's something I do in my business and I have done for many years. And I'm actually working on kind of scaling that. I'm going to ramp up my social media presence and really try to have a bigger outreach there and impact more people if I can. Because like I was saying, I feel blessed to have all this knowledge, have the background, the years of experience that I have, and I want to share that with the world and share it with anybody who's interested, or even has an inkling of wanting to have some of that information. I feel like it would be selfish to keep it to myself, and so that's I feel like that's what I was put here to do, and that's what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, I love this. Amazing. Are you going one-on-one at the moment with your clients, or do you have group classes? If not now, do you see yourself going to sort of larger classes in person? How do you sort of envision that happening? What are you doing today?
For sure. So at the moment, my business is all online. I have done a lot of in-person personal training sessions with clients locally in the past, but I travel a fair bit. And so at the moment I'm in Melbourne. I was back in the US for the past year. And so my business currently is just all online based, which is great because I can work with clients here in Australia, in the US, Canada, Europe, New Zealand. I've got clients all over the world in kind of the English speaking parts of it anyway. And I feel very fortunate to be able to do that and be able to connect with like-minded individuals wherever they may be who want to improve their health and fitness on a plant-based diet, and really just try and help create more fit vegan role models out there in the world of people who are really thriving and smashing stereotypes and looking good and crushing their goals, because that just has that ripple effect of, again, the people that they talk to and that they see and so on, just spreading that message far and wide and really breaking down those stereotypes and misconceptions that people have, that you need to eat meat for protein or to be manly or whatever it may be. And that's what I strive to do myself. But of course, there's only so many people that I'm going to personally see and interact with. And so if I can then pass that on to my clients, to the folks that I work with, that's something that I feel really fortunate to be able to do. At the moment, my business is all one-on-one, so I work directly with my clients, and it's a very kind of personalized and in-depth coaching program that I run. But I am looking at expanding that in the future, potentially to group coaching. I'm looking at creating some courses and other resources like that so that I can reach more people in that way as well.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that. When you say one-on-one at the moment, is it just by phone calls, Skype? Like, how do you manage the sort of consultations? Is it daily check-ins, weekly check-ins? Do you help them like A to Z, from training schedules to planning what you're going to eat to doing your macros and all of that stuff as well?
Absolutely. So my online coaching program, which is kind of the flagship program that I offer, and that's what most of my clients are enrolled in, it includes both training and nutrition, as well as kind of the lifestyle side of things as well. So, making sure people are sleeping enough and hydrating enough, managing stress levels, in addition to their training and dietary intervention, because I found that all of those variables make a difference in the end results people see, and of course for long-term health as well. And so I try to take all of those factors into account as much as I can. But certainly as far as the training side of things is concerned, like I write custom tailored workout plans for each of my clients. There are no cookie cutter programs. The program I give to one client is going to be different to anyone else's because it's specific to their situation, their goals, their schedule, if they have any injuries or limitations, what equipment they have access to, if they're working out at home versus at a gym, even what gym, like I go and look at photos or they send me photos of their gym equipment, so I can take all of that into account. I create the program for them. It's delivered inside an online software system, an app that they download, so it walks them through all the workouts. All the specifications are there for sets and reps and rest intervals and tempos and everything, so it makes it very straightforward for them to follow along. There are video demonstrations of all the exercises, and people can also record videos, and I always encourage my clients to do this and send them to me as well for technique feedback, so we can really make sure we have everything dialed in, make sure they're getting the most out of their training, even without being there in person in the gym, because I have clients all over the world. I find that video format works really, really well. And so that's how I approach the training side of things. And then each week I do check in with my clients, usually via Zoom, and those check-ins are up to an hour in length. So we go over everything in depth. We answer any questions they have. We do any troubleshooting. They give me feedback on how things are going with their training. And based on that, I update the program each week. So we keep progressing. We make sure it stays challenging, but still doable. So they keep getting that progressive overloading stimulus, keep adapting and making progress over time. And then on the nutrition side of things, typically I will encourage my clients to keep track of their diet in some capacity, like you mentioned earlier, like tracking calories and macros, that sort of thing. It's up to the individual if they want to go to that level of detail. So with a lot of my clients, we do use like MyFitnessPal, for example, is a very popular diet tracking app. It's very powerful. It's pretty easy to use. It has a lot of functionality, and that does give us a full breakdown of calorie and macronutrient intake. And that can be really helpful then in just making really precise and kind of scientific adjustments to their diet to make sure that we can generate predictable results, whether somebody wants to lose fat or gain muscle or whatever the case may be. But that's kind of, it's an in-depth approach to diet. Not everyone necessarily wants to kind of jump in at the deep end of the pool. And so I do have other forms of diet tracking where, somebody can take photos of their food and they can upload them inside the app. And that's still really powerful because just keeping track of what you're eating in the first place, it makes you more conscious of what you're eating, but it also gives us a record of what the diet looks like, and then I can provide feedback and sort of fine tune it still as we go from week to week to make sure they're moving in that direction. So there's a lot of different options there, and it's really specific to the individual. There's no one size fits all approach. I try to meet people where they are and give them all the tools and guidance and support that they need in order to move in the direction they want to go at the pace that's going to be sustainable for them.
Okay, amazing. I actually didn't think it was going to be that tailor-made to the individual.
Absolutely.
And this might be a silly question. Men, women, vegans, non-vegans, omnivores, that doesn't matter?
Good question, and that's not a silly question at all. So I work with men and women both. My area of specialty, of course, my niche is plant-based nutrition, specifically whole food plant-based. So generally, most people I work with are interested in eating that way. They may already be vegan or vegetarian, or they may be wanting to transition their diet in that direction. And that's totally cool. I want to meet people where they are. So I don't require that somebody has to be 100% vegan in order to work with me, but I'm always going to encourage them to incorporate as much as possible whole plant foods into their diet, because those are the healthiest foods that we can eat, and to kind of minimize or cut back on processed foods and animal products because they're less healthy and also less conducive to like weight loss or fitness goals that people have. But again, it's a flexible approach. I don't sort of have rigid requirements for what somebody does. It's up to them ultimately to figure out the right balance for them, but I'm there to provide as much support and guidance along the way as I can to make it easy for them to make that transition, and again, to make it something that's going to be healthy and sustainable in the long term.
Okay, amazing. And in terms of, like you mentioned this before, if they do have an existing injury, which seems to be common, I haven't encountered, but how do you sort of deal with that? Do you just sort of give them exercises that don't touch those areas, or?
Yeah, so typically there's a lot that we can do to work around it. Like even if you have an injury in one part of your body, I have a client, unfortunately, who had a traumatic injury a couple weeks ago. He broke his wrist in a cycling accident, and so he can't do any lifting with that hand, for probably a couple months or so. But it's like you can still train 90% of your body, right? And I've set up a custom program for him. I was just chatting with him today, and we're using like cable equipment, and he has like a strap that he can put on, so he's still doing like rows and things like that. So that's just one example, but there's lots that we can do. Even if you have injuries or multiple injuries or some sort of limitation there, I'll always do my best to try and work around it. But then typically what I encourage people to do is work with, you know, a physiotherapist or whoever the relevant professional is going to be locally that they can see in person in their area to make sure they're doing what they need to in order to really facilitate recovery from that injury so they can get back to 100% training capacity in the shortest time frame possible. Sometimes there are sort of long-term or chronic conditions that, you know, you have to work around, and we can absolutely do that. But usually it's kind of a situation where we're working in conjunction with whatever kind of rehab they may be doing to help recover from that injury as well.
Amazing. In terms of being an accountability partner, like you mentioned, you know, the weekly Zoom calls and stuff, is that what you recommend? Do you recommend like a daily check-in into an app or something, or do you find that the weekly check-in is enough?
I find the weekly check-ins work really well, but in between those, like if clients have questions or issues that come up, I offer 24/7 support via email or text message. People can reach out to me anytime, and I always reply as quickly as I can, answer questions or do any troubleshooting that comes up, or, you know, even if somebody feels like they went off the rails and they're not sure what to do or whatever it may be, always happy to provide support in that way. But also when it comes to kind of tracking progress and checking in, there are a lot of steps that people do daily, like logging their workouts, logging their food, tracking body weight or step count or things depending on what their goals are. Exactly. And I have all of that data in kind of my software system and dashboard, so I can see if people are keeping up with their sort of homework or not. And so there's kind of an accountability factor baked in there as well.
Right. Okay. Even though they're not speaking to you directly, they're speaking to you through the software, so you see if they're, you know, fallen off the wagon or something.
For sure.
Okay. Amazing. What's next for you? You've already mentioned, you know, you want to sort of transition, you know, less so in the bodybuilding scene, but just helping more people. Anything else you want to focus on?
Yeah, I think this year in particular, that's really the biggest area that I'm focusing on, is probably just trying to expand my reach and have, you know, bigger impact where I can reach more people. So I'm not someone where historically I've been super active on social media. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it, but I do recognize the value of it in terms of, like, you know, it's a great tool that we can use to reach a lot of people and sort of spread the good word about plant-based nutrition and fitness and all of that good stuff. And I'm also conscious that, like, if I'm here and I'm kind of doing my own thing and I'm crushing it on a vegan diet, but nobody knows about it, it's like, that's not really changing the world in a positive way. So I recognize that, you know, that there's a lot to be said there for kind of putting yourself out there in that way. And I have done some of that over the years, but that's my focus for this year, is to really double down on that and try and reach as many people as I can, as well as creating more resources, whether that's courses or, you know, even just like free downloads that people can access, whatever it may be, to help give people the tools they need to be successful on their plant-based fitness journey.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Forrest. We've covered a lot of ground. Anything else that I haven't touched on that you wanted to, you know, provide to the listeners and viewers? In terms of getting in touch with you, I'll make sure that all of that is provided in the show notes. But are you active on one particular platform over the others at all?
So I'd say Instagram is probably the best one to reach me at the moment. So my Instagram is just forest.nash. It's very simple. I'm also on Facebook, it's Forest Nash Fitness. And then I've got my website, which is just forestnash.com.au. And of course, you can link those down below as well. But yeah, there's, you know, people can reach out to me through any of those channels. Like I said, I'm happy to answer questions. I do offer those free consultations for folks who have, you know, questions or, you know, just interested in kind of the whole plant-based fitness world or transitioning to a plant-based diet, but they're not sure where to begin. I want to help out as many people in that way as I can. Regardless of whether or not somebody signs up for my services, I want to help them anyway. So that's what I'm here for. One thing I wanted to mention as well, just on that topic of kind of folks transitioning to a plant-based diet in particular, it's something we sort of briefly touched on earlier, but I think it's worth stating explicitly. A couple of things. One is, like we were talking about, you know, if you're eating a plant-based diet, you don't have to worry about protein if you're getting enough calories. Getting enough calories is a big deal. And that's something that I want to really drive home for folks as well, because oftentimes if you're in the habit of just the way you've always had, you know, lived your life, eating lots of processed foods, animal products, they tend to be more calorie dense. And then if you switch to a plant-based diet, it's particularly a whole food plant-based diet, the calorie density of the foods is lower, which means you have to eat a greater volume of food to get the same amount of calories in. And that's actually not a bad thing if you like to eat, which most people do. And particularly for weight loss purposes, it makes it really easy. But the thing is, sometimes folks will adopt a plant-based diet and they cut out a bunch of stuff because they're like, okay, I'm going to stop eating animal products, and they don't necessarily add enough back in to get all those calories that they need. And that's where you hear anecdotes of somebody like, oh, I tried going vegan, I didn't have enough energy and I was losing weight and I felt weak and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, you probably just weren't eating enough, particularly if you're losing weight and you didn't want to, then for sure you weren't eating enough, because that's how that works. And so that's something I really wanted to emphasize to folks, like eating a whole food plant-based diet for sure is the healthiest way to eat. I highly recommend it, but make sure you are getting some calorie dense foods in, eating plenty of whole grains, nuts and seeds, dried fruit, stuff like that. Smoothies are totally good, great way to get calories in. And you want to make sure that you are replacing the calories and the nutrients from the foods that you're cutting out with, whole plant sources, which are going to be healthier. You're going to get a better bang for your buck nutrition wise, but you want to make sure that you're getting enough calories in order to just kind of fuel your body, give it the energy that it needs, and make sure that you continue to feel good and have energy to thrive on a plant-based diet. So that was one final point that I wanted to add there as well.
Yeah, amazing. Just on the smoothie thing that you mentioned before, most of my week is smoothies in the morning, massive smoothie, but there's a lot of fruit in there, and I don't monitor my sugar levels afterwards. Thoughts on this? Is this because I hear this often? There's too much fruit.
Yeah.
But obviously, I put celery, sometimes even broccoli stems. Like I put whatever's lying around, I end up putting. But there's often, berries and mangoes and even apples. I try and keep the banana aside for separate, eat that separately. But everything else goes in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
But your thoughts on sugar spiking? Is that a myth?
So I think, again, it's very important to come back to where is the carbohydrate, where is the sugar coming from? So if you're having it in a whole food form, even if it's fruit that got blended up in a blender into a smoothie, that's still a whole food going in there. And so you've still got all the fiber and water and micronutrients and everything. And so the blood sugar response is going to be very different versus if you were to have refined sugar, like white sugar, table sugar, even things like honey and maple syrup and stuff like that are more refined. And so I would not shy away from that at all. Like if you're trying to lose weight, then you want to be conscious of overall how many calories you're getting in, but it's very hard to overeat on fruit, particularly fresh fruit, because it tends to be very high in water content. It's mostly water. It's going to fill you up a lot before you can overeat. And there just aren't that many people walking around who are 100 pounds overweight and like, man, I just couldn't stop eating apples. Like that doesn't happen, right? So that's not something we generally have to worry about. Fruit is super health promoting, super nutrient dense, particularly things like berries, as you mentioned, among the most nutrient dense foods that we can eat. I would encourage everyone to eat them on a daily basis. And absolutely, I think having a big smoothie for breakfast is a phenomenal way to start the day. And I often do that myself as well.
Okay, amazing. Favorite meal?
It's hard to say, but I'll say probably my biggest staple meal I have basically every single day for lunch. I had it actually before I came over here. It's rice and beans. I have like a burrito bowl, brown rice, black beans. I put some corn in there. I put avocado, lettuce, tomato, some coriander, hot sauce, stuff like that. That's my go-to meal. Typically, I'll have for lunch before I go and hit the gym. I like to train in the afternoon, and so that's going to be a high carb meal because of the rice, the beans, the corn, but also plenty of protein in there, particularly from the beans. Like I'll have a whole can of beans, like one of those 400-gram cans, drain the water off. Have that. That's like 20 grams of protein. You throw in all the other food, it's like at least 30 grams of protein in that meal, and probably over 100 grams of carbs. And that's going to give me a lot of energy then for my workout, my recovery, and any other activity I'm doing throughout the day. So I eat that just about every single day. I have done for years. I don't really get tired of it. I'm the type of person where I like to eat the same food every day because it just makes things really simple. I don't have to think about it too much. And that for sure is one of my go-to staples.
I love that. Yeah, I think I've seen pictures of your burrito bowl, and so I'll put a picture up on the screen. Anything else that we haven't touched on before we wrap it up?
I think we've done a pretty good job on covering off on everything. I want to thank you again, though. It was great chatting with you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And I hope that people have found this helpful. And again, I just want to underscore, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Anyone who might be watching this, I would love to help you. If you have questions, you're interested in plant-based nutrition, that's what I was put on this earth to do. Please don't hesitate to contact me. I would love to help.
Yeah, definitely contact him. He's a lovely gentleman. And as I keep saying, it's not often that we find good soul human beings that you can vibe with, and Forest is a classic example of this. And I'm very much leaning towards people who are, my tribe, if you will, that you can resonate with. And lovely human being, and pleasure meeting you in person. Thank you so much, because I've been admiring you as a person for so many years. This is like a amazing moment. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you as well. And my pleasure. It's great to be here, and I'm glad we got a chance to connect.
Thank you. Thanks, Forest. Thanks, mate. Thank you.